You ever have one of those workouts where afterwards you have rubber legs? That was me yesterday with our youth group. Harding Ice Trail, up, how many hundreds of miles? I don't know. It's not miles, but thousands of feet. And you get up there and it's just snow everywhere. And then afterwards you just feel like, maybe I shouldn't have done that since I'm preaching tomorrow. But, ironically, today's message is power in weakness. So here I am, If you have followed with us through this series, we started 2 weeks ago. Pastor Brian started this series on Judges. And we're not talking about judges in the sense of a judge in robes with a gavel hitting it, but talking about men and a woman who were chosen by God to help rescue or be an instrument to help rescue Israel out of the bondage, the enslavement that they were in, that they found themselves in from the surrounding nations. I've got a little ring here. Yeah. So Pastor Brian's talked about 2 judges already. And last week, if you missed it, you can pick up a CD. He talked about Deborah, the judge, and how she helped Israel escape out of the bondage that they were in against evil forces that were attacking Israel. Today, we're going to look at another judge. He's actually the 5th judge, even though we're 3 weeks in. And his name's Gideon. I'm really excited about it. He doesn't seem kind of like he fits the bill for what an actual hero would be, though. And I will just kind of give a preface here before we delve in. We've been going through the book of Judges. That's where we get the title Judges from. And we've been looking at it, and as Pastor Brian said last week, it's gory. Have you guys ever read it? Yikes. There's like blood flying all over the place. It's like PG-13 rated R. But we look at these stories, though, and we see them, and as Brian said last week, I agree, there are some things in there that we can gain for ourselves right where we're at and the things that we're going through today. And today we're talking about weakness, and there's a reason, and you'll see that as we go today through the scriptures. But I want to ask this question. How many of you have ever felt weak? Wow, only like 3 of you. Okay. That's amazing, You guys are superhumans. You're incredible. No plug for the movie, right? Many times we feel weak in life, and there's different types of weaknesses that we encounter in our life as well. It could be you're scrolling through Facebook and you realize, oh, what am I doing? I'm actually looking at people's lives, and I feel weak afterwards. Why? Oh, I'm comparing my life with theirs. This person seems to be working out every day. How can I compete with that? Or this person on Facebook has their life all together. Their family's doing cool stuff all the time, And man, that summer guilt of Alaska, right? I should be out doing something. And we just feel like we're less than because we start comparing ourselves. Maybe you're in a place where you're like me, where the other day, back in October, I hurt my back really bad to where I couldn't do barely anything, couldn't barely move. So I've been going to the therapist, and I walk into the therapist, and he takes me into the gym, right? We go into the gym, and it's a gym not just for people who are hurt. There's a time you feel weak when you look over and you go, man, look at that guy. He's huge. And I feel like a wuss because he's benching like 500. And man, I can't do that. So there's those times too where you feel weak, right? Maybe there's a different type of weakness, though, that we feel in life. Those times when circumstances around us seem to be out of our control and we feel weak from that. Maybe it's someone who you knew who tragically died. Maybe it's some other things that are happening, but it just makes us feel weak or powerless in those situations. And then the other situation I find in weakness is sometimes we feel weak all the time. It's not even a situation. Maybe you're here today and you're struggling with that. Maybe it's from choices that you've made in your life, in the past. Things that you've said, I'm going to choose to do what is wrong even though I know what is right. Paul talks about it in Romans. And we've been struggling with it as humanity for years, where we choose to do what is wrong and then the consequences start adding up, right? We find ourselves feeling trapped. We find ourselves feeling ensnared. Today we're going to look at a story, and I want to read the first part of that because it really starts to touch where we're at in our weakness. And another group of people called Israel, the nation, was trapped. We just ended up talking about Deborah, right? And she helped free Israel as a judge of Israel. And they had peace for 40 years. But Israel, as you start to see in the book of Judges, they have this cycle where they just keep going back into sin over and over and over. And they need freedom again. And so what do? They cry out for help. And that's where we pick up in Judges chapter 6. So if you have your Bibles, you could turn to that. It'll be on the screens too, the New Living Translation. I encourage you to look at other translations too as we go through. You can also open up your phone. There's some great apps out there that are free. YouVersion, Blue Letter Bible, eSword. There's some other great apps that are out there. If you don't have that with you, you can download one of those. But we're going to pick up in Judges chapter 6. We're going to look at somebody who's considered a hero. In Hebrews chapter 11 in the New Testament, he's listed with all of these people of faith, of having great faith. But you look at him today and you're going to go, he doesn't seem like he really has faith. So there's some irony there. We're going to read a lot of scripture today. I'm going to skim over some parts, but I truly believe that there's so much here that we need to read and we need to learn truly about this story. All right? So we're going to read about Gideon. Some of you automatically had flashes of fleeces flying through your mind. And that's true. That's in this story. But there's so much more in this story as well. So we're going to start with just verse 1. And we're going to read to verse 6. It says, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. We see that every time before a judge is called, okay, through the book of Judges. So the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. Okay, that's a key, so remember that. We'll go back to it. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Yikes. I mean, they were so ensnared by the Midianites, this group of people. By the way, Midian means judgment. Okay? And by the way, some of these places that they hid in, that they created for themselves, can still be found today in some of the mountains over in Israel. Verse 3, whenever the Israelites planted their crops, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east would attack Israel, camping in the land and destroying crops as far away as Gaza. So you have Midian, judgment, this nation called judgment. You have the Amalekites, and that name basically means a people who lick blood in Hebrew, so they were pretty brutal. Was that from, again, like I said, this is gory, right? But is that from some kind of religious rite that they did, or maybe they did that in battle, licking their swords? It looks kind of cool, right? Or maybe kind of weird. But here they are, these marauders coming in, and they would attack Israel. Verse 4, camping in the land, and this is a different type of attack. Listen to this. Camping in the land and destroying crops as far away as Gaza. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all the sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. These enemy hordes, coming with their livestock and tents, were as thick as locusts. They arrived on droves of camels, too numerous to count. So if you were with Brian last week, he talked about chariots with blades. How many chariots was it? Anybody remember? 900 chariots with blades the previous forces had. So this one is denoted by camels too numerous to count. All right, so we're talking about tens, hundreds of thousands probably or more people coming in. I mean, the camels were too numerous to count. Who knows how many people with the camels, right? So you see this giant caravan of nomads coming in. And what are they doing, all right? They're staying in the land, it says, until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord. It took them 7 years. I'd be like, get these people out of here now, right? 7 years. Every year at harvest time, the Midianites and these groups would come in, strip everything from these people, and then leave. See ya. So it wasn't necessarily killing them, it was impoverishing them. It's a different type of slavery that we're talking about here. All right? And Israel was finding themselves utterly weak and had nothing. And they were having to hide because of their shame, right? They're hiding to stay away from these people. Just 47 years earlier, they had destroyed entire nations. And now they're hiding. What was the change? What brought them to this place where they're acting this way with these people coming in and taking from them? You know, this type of attack has a name for it. It's called the scorched earth policy. If you've ever studied Civil War, William Sherman, he was a he was a general, and he went in and he basically had his troops live off the land in the south, and he destroyed all of their crops, burned all of their fields, and destroyed their railroads. And he is said to be one of the main reasons why the South lost the war, because they didn't have the resources to fight. And eventually, if you don't have food to feed your army, how are you going to fight? Do you see the predicament Israel is in? They can't even fight because they don't have enough guys. They don't have enough strength. So they're totally trapped. And then they cry out to God. And when I read this, automatically, right, maybe it's my pastor's mind or something, but I automatically think, am I in that scenario, or have I been in that scenario where I'm so weakened, that I feel trapped? You know, have I been, and yes, I have, in an addiction that keeps me in this place of being trapped? Am I so weak that I can't get out of the circumstances that I'm in? Wow, that's hard. Now, I want to unpack this a little further. Let's read a little more here. Verse 7 says this: when they cried out to the Lord because of the Israelites, he, that is God, when they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites. They don't give his name. He said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live. But you have not listened to me." So they cry out to God, and instead of sending a judge to free them from these nations, he sends a different type of judge, because it seems judgmental to me, a prophet who comes to them. We don't know his name, and he tells them, hey, remember this? Remember, God rescued you out of Egypt back when you were under Pharaoh with Moses? God brought you out of that. Do you remember that? You were enslaved then. Not only physically, but if you read the scriptures, it says they were enslaved spiritually. They're worshiping the gods of the Egyptians at that time too. Do you remember that? I freed you and I pulled you out of Egypt. And then he says, remember the land you're in now? I gave it to you. Do you remember when you came in? I gave you the blessing of this land. Remember? You drove out the nations there. I told you, kill everyone and get them out of here. You remember that? And I gave you this land. But then he says something here that's troubling. Something that us millennials, especially today and post-millennials, say, man, that is judgy. He says, essentially, the reason that you're having these troubles is because of your choices to not follow after me, to not serve me, right? To not put me first in your life. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, you put these idols up, and you're worshiping these idols of the Amorites. You drove the Amorites out. You destroyed them years ago under Moses and Joshua. If you look up the story, it's King Og and all of these guys and the Amorites. And by the way, Amorite in Hebrew means rebel, okay, or a babbler. You're now worshiping them. You're worshiping their gods. They essentially worshiped three gods: Baal, Ashtaroth, and another one. Molech. Yeh. Maybe you've been going through this series and you think, how could God do that? I've heard some people question the God in the Bible. Is he really loving? Why would he ask nations to be completely destroyed? Why? Why would he do that? And part of that answer, I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but part of that answer is in Leviticus chapter 18. Partly I'm not going to read it because it's long, and partly because it's really like a PG-13 list, okay? It's a PG-13 list of the sins that these nations who were destroyed by Moses and Joshua, or mostly, the sins that they were doing. And after you get through all of this gross list of sexual sins, you get down to the end, and it basically says, and they were worshiping the god of Molech. God of Molech. To worship him, you basically had to go and take a bunch of bronze and create a giant statue out of this bronze, pure bronze. And then every day, heat this statue till it's red hot. And then, on the hands of the statue, you would take your live child and place it on the statue to sacrifice your child. And every day, the Amorites and these other nations were doing this to the god of Molech, sacrificing their own children. You could see when you read through that list, there had to have been lots of children, lots of babies that were being born. And they had to do something with them, right? So what'd they do? They sacrificed them to the god of Molech. This is what the Israelites were doing, right? And God says, when you do that, when you do these sins, the land will vomit you. Literally, that's what it says. The land will vomit you out. They were choosing to do this themselves. They were choosing to be destroyed and to destroy themselves. And so here's Israel doing the same exact things. And so Midian comes in. Judgment comes in to conquer them. And eventually they cry out to God. Today I have to ask the question for myself, and for us. Sometimes there are times where our own choices lead us to the place where we're at. And they bring us to a place where, man, we're so trapped, we're full of regrets maybe, and we don't know what to do about it. And we feel so helpless. And it can come across as judgy, right? When someone, if today someone came to you and said, hey, the reason that you're having these problems is because of this, this, and this. Just like, dude, you don't know me, get away from me. But sometimes, not always, the circumstances around us, but sometimes we find ourselves in that place, just like the Israelites. And we might come to a place of not knowing what to do. And maybe all we do is just, like I did years ago, just fall on your face and cry out to God for help. In comes our hero. We're going to pick up next in the next verse. And in this next verse, we see Gideon come on the scene. All right? And this is verse 11. It says, then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belongs to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress. Now, a winepress is like 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It's this giant hole set in the ground, surrounded by stone. So here's Gideon. He's got his little pitchfork or whatever he's using, and he's trying to thresh wheat. Normally, they did it on top of a cliff, so the wind would blow away the weeds and the seeds of the weeds, and they'd have the fresh wheat. But here he is, I imagine he's frustrated. Gotta do this, I gotta do it in a hole because the Midianites are all around. If they see it, they're gonna come and take it. Good grief, this is ridiculous, right? So here he is, he's threshing wheat in the bottom of this wine press to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, mighty hero, the Lord is with you. You think he feels mighty at that time? He's hiding from this group of people who had basically enslaved them. Maybe not. Let's see what it says in verse 13. Sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. Does he sound like a hero? He asks two questions when he's told that he's a hero and when God is mentioned. The first one is, why? Why has this happened to us? And the second one is similar. It is, where are the miracles that we were told that happened in Egypt? I don't see anything happening. Do these questions sound familiar? I've asked them. I've asked God. In situations I've been in, I've asked him, why? Why, God? Have you heard people ask that? Have you asked it? Why? Why am I in this scenario? Why has this happened? Why are families going through all this turmoil every day around us? Why is my family maybe? Why was a man brutally stabbed recently in our community? Why, God, are people dying suddenly? Why are we having all this trouble as a nation and not getting unified? Why, God? And then we come to the next question because we want something to happen. We want a miracle. And we ask, where are the miracles today? Like in the Bible. Any of you asked that? What is God doing? Some of the great atheists take it to that level too. And then sometimes we can conclude one of three things if we don't hear an answer. Just like Gideon. Well, God must not be here. He must abandon us. Or we conclude, I'm not good enough. That's why God's not in my life. That's why I'm not seeing miracles. Right? I'm not doing enough. I'm not enough. Do you hear it? We say it to ourselves, don't we? Or we might conclude the third thing that the atheists do. Oh, God just doesn't exist. He doesn't. But I'm here today to say he does exist. He does care about you. He does care about your weaknesses, the problems that you find yourself in. He loves you. And he wants to rescue you from those. We're going to see that in the story too. So we're going to pick up here. Let's see what in verse 14, what God says in response to these two questions. Then the Lord turned to him. It's kind of like, boom. Obviously, Gideon doesn't realize this is an angel either, right? He looks like a human. The Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. That's his call. And God calls us. When he does, hear his voice. But Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan, or my family, is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh. And by the way, Manasseh is the smallest tribe. And I am the least in my entire family. God, don't you realize my name Gideon means hewer? Hewer. Like hewer of stone, hewer of rock. I'm not even hewing anything. I'm just throwing wheat into the wind right now. God, I'm nothing. Why are you choosing me? That's kind of ridiculous. But God is still saying, I am sending you. All right? And then he goes on and he says, the Lord said to him, I will be with you. Some translations say it a little better. I am with you. And you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. Camels too numerous to count? And I'm going to destroy them as if I was one man? Like, what? How am I going to do that? Okay. So what's Gideon's response? He says, show me a sign to the angel. Anybody else ask for God for a sign? God, you got to show me. If this happens, if I turn the radio on, then I know it's you, right? Or if this and this happens. So in this case, we're going to skim over this part, but I'll have the highlights for you. He says, wait a second, angel. And he runs, and he gets a goat and prepares it. And he brings some gravy, and he pours the gravy on the meat. The angel reaches out a staff, and whoo! This present that he gave, or offering, is gone. And the angel disappears. And Gideon's like, I'm going to die. I've seen God. Because there are verses that say no one has seen God and lived. And then then Gideon hears God's reassuring voice. No, you aren't going to die. You're going to live. And he's reassuring Gideon. Even though Gideon technically tested God, and the Israelites were told, don't test God. Deuteronomy 6:16 says, don't test me as you did in the times of at the waters of Marah, which means bitterness. Don't test me to see if I can really do this, okay? But Gideon did, and God shows mercy, though. He shows his true nature. He says, I still love you. I'm not going to kill you, okay? But then let's skip ahead. Because after the test, Gideon is told to do something that I find is very important for us today. In verse 25, that night the Lord said to Gideon, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. How long have they been enslaved? Pull down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it. Then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary, laying the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fire the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had commanded. But he did it at night, because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. Early the next morning, as the people of the town began to stir, someone discovered that the altar of Baal had been broken down and that the Asherah pole beside it had been cut down. In their place, a new altar had been built, and on it were the remains of the bull that had been sacrificed. The people said to each other, who did this? And after asking around and making a careful search, they learned that it was Gideon, the son of Joash. Bring out your son, the men of the town demanded of Joash. He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and for cutting down the Asherah pole. Irony of ironies, these Israelites had been commanded by God, if you worship any other gods besides Yahweh, you're to be stoned to death. They are so deep, far away from God. They're saying, kill this guy who set up an altar to God. Yikes. But listen what happens. The strangest, most interesting voice comes out of nowhere. The man whose altar it was. But Joash shouted to the mob that confronted him, why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal truly is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar. From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means let Baal defend himself, or contends with Baal, because he broke down Baal's altar. There's a very important principle here that's important for us to remember. First, the Israelites cry out to God. Then Gideon is called, and what is he asked to do? He's asked to go and put his house in order, right? Because he can't lead the nation if his house is worshiping idols. He can't be an example to people if he doesn't first follow after God himself. His own family had an altar to Baal and to Asherah. His own. He had to get rid of the stuff that was controlling his family. And today, I believe God is calling us, saying, it's time to put away the idols that are in your life. No, not statues. Maybe. But these things that are pulling our hearts away from God. The things that we keep our mind on more than God himself. The things we entertain ourselves with. The things that we desire and we go spend too much money on maybe. And we find that the credit card companies are kind of like the Midianites, saying, hey, you owe more than what you even spent. And we find ourselves getting entrapped. And we find ourselves feeling so utterly worthless and weak in life. And we even find ourselves having so little faith. But here God is saying, put your house in order first. Get rid of these things. Destroy the altar that's in your life. I don't know what it is for you, but there may be something that God is saying to you, get rid of it. It is coming between you and me. And then we are to go and accept that sacrifice that's been made for us centuries ago. An eternal sacrifice, a spiritual sacrifice made by Jesus. We don't no longer have to worship or kill a bull that's 7 years old. Jesus is our sacrifice, because without a sacrifice, there can be no redemption, no rescue. You see the connections? God's calling us to that place today. So after this happens, Baal obviously doesn't come through and kill Gideon, right? Gideon then does something unthinkable. He's already tested God once. He goes and tests God again. And then he tests God again 3 times. And he knows, don't be angry with me, God. I'm going to test you. He goes and does it. And this is where some of you might know the story. He lays out a fleece, and he says if the fleece is wet or dry, he does both. Okay, and the ground around it's wet or dry, then I know this is God, right? He goes through both of them. Does God then come out and strike him with lightning? You shouldn't be doing that. He doesn't. God shows mercy to him every time. He shows grace to him and says, I love you. And I understand you're a human. I understand you're weak in your faith. And he says that to us today. I understand it's hard for you to believe. It's hard for you to have faith. And I show you that grace and that love, regardless. Even if you are testing me. I love you. Right? So we go through this unthinkable test, right? And at the end he says, I'll use you for great things. We're going to pick up in Judges chapter 7. I don't want to miss what happens here. Some of you don't know this story, and I don't want to miss the end. Verse 1, so Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Harod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home. So 22,000 of them went home. Yikes. God, camels too numerous to count. Leaving only 10,000 who were willing to fight. But the Lord told Gideon, there are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. So when Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all those who cup water in their hands and lap it like a dog. In the other group, I'm going to lose my place here, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths from their hands. That sounds good. Mouths in the stream. And then this is the sad part, the scary part. Only 300 of the men drank from their hands. Okay, yeah. So God, I get all the rest, right? All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. Okay, cool, yeah. The Lord told Gideon, with these 300 men, no, please, don't say this, don't say this. I will rescue you, oh no, and give you victory over the Midianites. 300 against all those people? Yikes. Whoa. All right. Send all the others home. So Gideon collected the provisions and ram's horns of the other warriors and sent them home. But he kept the 300 men with him. So we're going to collect the provisions here. Some of you are asking, what is this? Some of you already know what it is. Anybody know what this is? It's a horn or a shofar. All right? And this, for those of you who are asking, is my head nod to you, to those of you youth, okay? This is a Minecraft torch. And my son got me some batteries so it works. You could pass this in Salvation Army and not even know what it is. I almost did. So they collected their provisions and their ram's horns, and he sent everybody else home. All right, let's find out what happens. So we're going to skip over this next part, but I'll give you a summary. Gideon is still afraid, and God knows it. He's against impossible odds. 300 men against so many. He's weak. Can you see that he's weak? He's tested God 3 times, and he's scared. But God in his grace and his mercy knows that. He knows that we're scared at times too. He knows that some of you are in troubles now, and he knows that you might be afraid too. But he gives Gideon a little bit of help. He says, go down into the valley and listen to a tent. Okay, so he goes and he hears the Midianites talking. And one says, I had this dream, and it was this roll of barley coming down the mountain, and it knocked over our tents. And the other man kind of gives credence to the dream, right? He says, well, that's surely Gideon. And he's coming down, and he's going to wipe us all out. What? A dream? How did you interpret that out of a dream? But he did. And it shows Gideon that the Midianites are terrified of God, and they're terrified of him. And he gets encouragement, right? So let's pick up and see what it says here in this next part. We're going to skip ahead to verse 15, chapter 7. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed and worshiped before the Lord. Then he returned to the Israelite camp and shouted, get up, for the Lord has given you victory over the Midianite hordes. He divided the 300 men into 3 groups and gave each man a ram's horn and a clay jar with a torch in it. Then he said to them, keep your eyes on me. When I come to the edge of the camp, do just as I do. I'm whispering kind of like they're sneaking through the woods, right? Okay? As soon as I and those with me blow the ram's horns, blow your horns too, all around the entire camp, and shout, for the Lord and for Gideon. Now, it was just after midnight, after the changing of the guard, when Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the Midianite camp. Suddenly, they blew the ram's horns and broke their clay jars. Then all 3 groups blew their horns and broke their jars. They held the blazing torches in their left hands, okay, and the horns in their right hands. And they all shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon! Each man stood at his position around the camp and watched. What do you think is going to happen? If you haven't heard this story, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think? Is it up there? Oh, it's probably up there. All right. They watched as all the Midianites rushed around in a panic, shouting as they ran to escape. When the 300 Israelites blew their ram's horns, the Lord caused the warriors in the camp to what? Fight against each other with their swords. Those who were not killed fled to places as far away as, and I'm not even going to attempt to say those names. There's some good ones. All right. And one might get me in trouble, right? On stage. So here's Gideon. He's told to reduce his army, reduce himself, and then suddenly to go around this camp and take these pots, these torches, and these horns, and to yell out and watch what happens. Let me illustrate something for you. What am I missing? I'm a soldier. Where is it at? Where's my sword? And they even yelled out, a sword for the Lord. They added that. He said for the Lord and for Gideon. They said, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Where's my sword? I don't have it. God's calling us today to do something very similar. He's calling you to reduce yourself, to get out of the way, stop trying to take control, and allow yourself to what? Be a vessel that is broken, so that He can receive the glory, so that His light can shine into the darkness. And then He's calling you to blow the horn, figuratively, to say, God, you have the victory over my weaknesses. You have the victory over this spot that I am in today. He's called me to tell you this today. He's told me to say this to you from this message, that you can be assured of His victory. Because when you claim Him having the victory over the enemy, they hadn't even been defeated yet. When you allow yourself to be broken and His light to shine out, then all you have to do is step back and watch as God conquers the enemies, the problems, the scenarios you've gotten yourself in, all of these issues. He comes in and takes over, and He will defeat them for you, regardless of where you're at in your life. Remember that. This whole principle that's found in Gideon is wrapped up in a couple verses later in the New Testament from a guy named Paul. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. This is what Paul says. Let me turn in my Bible here. I'll just read it from up here. Paul is talking about this weakness that he has. We don't know what it is. He calls it a thorn in the flesh. It could be a physical problem. It could be financially, he doesn't have enough money to do what he needs to do. It could be persecutions. Who knows what this issue, this weakness is? But he talks about it here, and he says 3 different times, I begged the Lord to take it away. Each time he said, this is important when God speaks, listen, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, what? Then I am strong. That's the broken vessel. That's us saying, I am not going to take control. I am not going to try to build myself up to a certain level, to raise myself up on the leadership ladders. I'm going to allow myself to be broken and release control so that God can take over, so He can receive the glory and not me or not anyone around me. So through this, if you missed the plan of rescue in this talk and in this story, I'm going to outline it really quick for you. It's this. Number 1, God is saying to us to cry out. Cry out to God, just as the Israelites did, to say, God, I need you. I need your help. I am utterly weak in this scenario. Number 2, acknowledge your part. Gideon didn't acknowledge his part, did he? He didn't acknowledge what the prophet said. But we're to acknowledge and ask ourselves, do I have a part in this? Really, honestly, I am a sinner, and I'm pretty sure everyone in here is, right? We're all sinners. We all have done something wrong. And number 3, put your house in order, just as Gideon did. Destroy the things that keep your heart away from God. Get rid of them. I'm telling you now, don't keep it in your life. If you even have a thought, this might be keeping me away from God, don't let it. It's dangerous. And it will pull you and your family for generations away from Him. Get rid of it. And then, in putting your house in order, turn to Jesus and say, forgive me. I need that forgiveness. Jesus, I need your help. Number 4, this is a hard one. Even if you've already done number 3, reduce yourself. Ooh, that's hard. We all like to get a pat on the back, right? Sometimes we really manipulate people to get it. But reduce it. Say, God, what do you want in my life? Take all of me. Take control. I don't want to take back control from you. And then I'll step back and allow weakness into your life. Allow yourself to be broken. And then raise that horn and say, God, you're going to receive victory over this. I believe in you. And then number 5, the easiest sounding one, but possibly the hardest, wait and watch what happens in your life. Because as my dad has told me, and I'll say to you, it's not about you. Whoa, it's not. It's about God and what He is going to do in your life. All right? And when you wait and watch, you're simply saying through your actions, I believe. I believe in you, God. And I trust in you. So will you trust Him today? Will you entrust all of your weaknesses to God? Will you allow yourself to stay broken so His light can shine out? Will you stop trying to take control and allow Him to take over? I'm going to pray for you that you can do that. Let's pray. Father, I just lift up everyone here today. There are some in this room who may feel weak, who may feel like at times that they're worthless. I know I do. God, you've called me and us to make disciples for you. Just in that alone, I feel inept, and I don't feel like I can do it. But God, you've called us to break the addictions in our life, to get out of those, to turn to you. You've called us to lead our families. You've called us to help others around us. And we don't know, God, at times how to do that. We're weak. Other times, God, we feel like we don't even have enough faith to believe, so we say, like the man in the Bible to Jesus, help me in my unbelief. God, I know you're going to do that for us. Those in this room who are crying out with all of their heart to you, you hear their cries because you're the same yesterday in Gideon's time as you are today. And you love us. God, please hear their cries and rescue us from the places that we've found ourselves in. Help us through, God, to be broken. It's in your name I pray, Jesus. Amen.